How much did you make off the Oculus sale?
Oh man, I probably shouldn't say, because this is also one of those complex things where, you know, there was the sale. So there's what they believe they called the merger consideration form of, portion of the compensation. And then you cut an employment deal where they say, we're going to pay you, this much for 5 years. I can say that I was locked up on a 5-year vesting schedule. So typical would be 4. Most of our employees were 4. I got locked up for 5 because I was a key guy. And that money technically is not for the acquisition. It's just what you're being paid for. Yep. So, and of course, you can't pretend, you can't say they're the same thing, or they're supposed to be treated differently, tax wise, compensation wise. And then of course there's the bonuses we had. We had an earnout that was actually a huge earnout. It was hundreds of millions of dollars for the founders of the company if we could hit certain sales targets and user like hours of time targets. And we actually had 4 years to hit those targets, and we hit them within less than 2 years. So we actually did. It's kind of funny when people are like, oh man, the acquisition must not be going as well as people expect. It's like, no, we maxed out the top bracket of our earnout because we were kicking butt. But anyway, it was in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I can tell you that. So, in the healthy hundreds of millions of dollars.
Were you? So a bunch of people who listen to this. Sorry, I'll go real quick. A bunch of people who listen to this are founders and like would want to sell their company someday. And both me and Sam, we started this podcast right when we both exited our companies, because it's like, all right, we're kind of earning out. Well, we can't start another company right now, but like, oh, we can start a podcast. That sounds kind of fun. And actually, just yesterday, I just closed on another sale of a company, but these are small scale compared to what you did, right? Like,
congratulations.
Thank you. But you sold for, I don't know, $2 or $3 billion. How does that happen? Somebody, Zuck comes over to your house and is like, I'll give you $3 billion for this. Like, how does that conversation go down? When you're talking about the sort of like the grand slam type of outcomes?
Well, it's a long story, but I know Sam didn't want to talk all about VR, but
no, this shit's interesting to me.
Oh, great. We won't talk about VR optics and the metaverse then. But I guess on the business side of it, the interesting thing about the acquisition is that we didn't have any intention of selling initially when we first had our conversation with Facebook. And I think that really was a positive thing because actually first time we talked, I think basically we were offered $1 billion to sell. And we said, no, we're not interested. We think this company's easily going to surpass that value. We think it's not going to be a problem for us to make more money. And we're happy to work with you guys, but we don't want to be.
By the way, was that easy to say no to $1 billion? I mean, you started this thing like on a Kickstarter, dude. Like, at some point were you like, was it hard to say no, or was it not an issue at that point?
It wasn't an issue for me, and I think different people had different opinions. I mean, look, if you look over my career, I've made a lot of similar decisions. Like when I was starting Oculus, when I was deciding whether I was going to do a Kickstarter or work for someone else, I actually had a job offer on the table from Sony to run a PlayStation VR lab, out of PlayStation Group. And when I turned them down, they actually doubled the offer, and then I had to turn them down again. And a lot of people were wondering, how could you have done that? How could you have decided to do your own thing? It was so much higher risk. And I think that a lot of it is social programming. I grew up watching media that conditioned me to believe that when you have an opportunity, you have to take it. When you almost have to follow the narrative. And looking back, I'm not sure I could have done anything else. Like, could I have stayed in school instead of starting Oculus once I realized I had this breakthrough in VR technology? I think I could not have possibly done it. It's almost to the level of free will not existing. I could not have chosen that. Could I have gone and worked for Sony? Looking back, I don't think so. I think I couldn't have made that decision. And I think it's actually the same thing with that $1 billion offer. Like, I almost could not have said yes. Like that first offer, I like, narratively, it makes no sense. It doesn't align with what I've been trained as what you do when you're a free thinking iconoclast. And so I couldn't have done it. I think what happened is a few things changed over time after that initial offer. We didn't talk to Facebook for a few months after that. And a few things happened. One, it became clear that our competition was not only serious, but was going to be putting massive dollars into their success. It's something not a lot of people remember, but I certainly do, because it was a big deal in my mind. The day that we announced No, it wasn't the day we announced. The day we finalized the Facebook acquisition was the same day that Sony announced PlayStation VR. And we had known that it was coming for a while. We'd actually even shown each other prototypes and stuff. But it really reinforced this was a serious thing. We were going to have some of the biggest games companies in the world putting hundreds of millions of dollars into competing with us. And that made, I think, that made the pitch that Facebook came back with, which is, listen, maybe you could make more money as an independent company, but if you're with us, we're going to make VR happen much faster. So yes, you might make more money, but you're going to go much slower than if we were able to artificially supercharge your growth far beyond even what you could do with venture capital. And they were willing to commit billions of dollars a year for a period of a decade or more. And that's a really tough thing to turn down when you really believe in something.
And is this like literally Zuck coming to your house and talking to you about this? Or is there like an army of lawyers in between you guys that are like, bankers and corp dev people?
It was a very small number of people. I mean, I think that the lawyers and the accountants are much more likely to be involved in a deal when the deal is contingent on your revenue and your multiples and your P&Ls. Like that's where you need to drag those people in to really make an assessment. This was such a high level bet. It's not like, oh, I think that you have this margin on your headset and you've sold this many development kits. It was so early and the technology is so nascent. The real bet is, do you believe in the metaverse? Do you believe that there's going to be a virtual world parallel to our own where you're living and you're working and you're playing? And then most importantly, do you believe this is the best team in the world to do it? And I didn't know this at the time, but I found out later that Mark had been going around and talking to various university research labs, government research labs, talking to seeing what other companies were doing. And their conclusion was, we were way ahead of everyone else. And that if this was going to happen, this shift to immersive computing, the final computing platform, arguably, that we were the people in the best position to do it. And that's not something that a lawyer can really give an opinion on. It's not something that an accountant can put a value on. It's a very high level bet.
What was your personal financial situation when you turned down the $1 billion offer?
So at the time, early in Oculus, I started Oculus using my own money. And at that time, I was working a minimum wage job and living in a 19-foot camper trailer. I was 19 years old. So for people who aren't familiar with the story to that degree, I mean, I had almost no money, literally had a few $100s in my bank account because I spent all the money that I made putting myself through school and working on virtual reality technology. And I was extraordinarily, and I had a minimum wage job. I was also fixing computers on the side. For a while, I'd been buying broken iPhones, fixing them and unlocking them, selling those for spare cash. And so I'd burned a lot of money on my nutty hobby. And when we started Oculus, we didn't pay ourselves very much. By the time the acquisition happened, I had given myself a raise. We decided that nobody in the company was going to make over $100,000. We called it the 100K Club. So we were paying the CEO $100,000. I was getting paid $100,000. And to me, that actually felt incredible. I was like, wow, $100,000. This is absolutely crazy. I can afford anything.
You're like, how many iPhones I'd have to fix to make $100,000?
Heck of a lot.
Because you were fixing iPhones and like scrubbing boats or something, I read. Is that what you were doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I started working on VR stuff, I worked for a few years in a boat yard. So yeah, scrubbing boats, repainting the bottom paint, sweeping the boat yard, that type of stuff. So to me, the money was not a huge motivating factor. Also because maybe too optimistically, I believed Oculus was going to be worth tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars. So it really wasn't the money. I know this is what contrary to what I said before, but it wasn't the money that was motivating me to make the sale. It was the pitch. Hey, we're going to get you billions of dollars right now. Like not the compensation for the acquisition, but we're going to give you your organization billions of dollars a year to go out and make virtual reality actually happen. And that's what you're going to need to compete with Google, to compete with Sony, to compete with Microsoft, all of which have seen what you're doing, bought in, like they've drunk your Kool-Aid, but they're going to try to kill you over it. That was kind of the situation we were in. And Facebook was one of the very few companies that had a strong incentive to make virtual reality and immersive computing writ large to come about as quickly as possible, because unlike Google, unlike Microsoft, they did not benefit from the status quo in the hardware space. If we kept using mobile phones and normal computers for the next 20, 30 years, Google and Microsoft are going to do just fine. Like they're already the winners in that paradigm. If you can shake everything up and force a reset with immersive computing, AR, VR, MR, whatever you want to call it, it could be that Microsoft is one of the top players, and it could be that Apple and Google are some of the top players, but it's unlikely that all of them are going to remain the dominant players. And that's an opening for a company like Facebook to come in. And even if they're not first place, forcing the reset puts them in second or third place instead of being totally subservient to the operating system vendors and to the hardware vendors. So it was one of those things where there were other companies that were interested. None of them actually had a strong incentive to put billions of dollars into VR on an ongoing basis. And I mean, you can see Google killed their VR program. First, they killed their PC VR team. Then they killed their mobile VR team. Microsoft is winding down their internal efforts. I mean, it's a tough business, and I'm not convinced that Oculus would still be around if we hadn't had those resources.